Wales and Queensland, and pay my respects to the custodians of the land and to the elders past and present. Thank you for this event. I'm glad to see my fellow colleagues, and I'm really look forward to discussing all these great issues that you raised. And I would like to draw your attention to the migration and migrant issues of cultural belonging in regional areas of Australia. And probably let me just share my slides with you.
Just before you start, how would you like me to
yes,
verbally call out?
You can interrupt me. Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you.
Just a second. I can't see slideshow. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes, it's great. Nice and clear.
Yeah, so before we begin, I just would like to make a short overview of this research. It took place in 4 regional areas of Australia, in Cairns, Queensland, Toowoomba, Queensland, and also Wagga Wagga and Coffs Harbour in New South Wales. It included participants from various ethnic backgrounds. So I didn't make any distinction between Yazidi communities or South African communities or Southeast Asian communities or communities from Middle East. And the purpose of this research was actually to understand how music as a proxy for the arts actually can be an instrument that can address issues of cultural belonging in the regional areas of Australia. Yes, and probably just to provide the context for everyone, why do we need to talk about regional areas as something special? What is so special in regional areas resettlement, and why it creates a special agenda for refugees and for the negotiation of identity and belonging in this area? Probably some well-known examples and knowledge that actually non-Western migrations presumably predominantly was happening to the urban areas globally, and metropolitan and urban areas were the recipients of non-Western migration, and therefore they created enclaves, they created spaces, they created practices of accommodating non-Western identities. The regional areas are more represented by small communities. Sometimes they're not communities at all. We're talking about several families relocated. For example, Burundi's family in Coffs Harbour. These communities are small, they are scattered, and regional areas have not accumulated infrastructures or practices for non-Western cultural identities. To make things worse, the current migration policies operates on a post-multicultural framework, which in most simplistic terms means that Australian society has already achieved multicultural acceptance and competences. Therefore, there is no reason for the government to participate as a regulator. And the meaning of the migration, would it be skilled migration or would be humanitarian intake, would be actually to integrate these communities into economic production, and therefore migration is ascertained in the economic productivity terms. And all the issues of cultural belonging they face on their journey, it's actually a subject of negotiations on a peer-to-peer basis, on a grassroots levels, rather than the government actually take somehow actually take participation in this process. So what's and this is the second factor. The third one, that urban landscape, as I mentioned before, has created this post-industrial creative outlook, and we know that urban areas are famous or associated with sophisticated cultural industries. The regional areas actually understood as a cultural peripheries, that nothing happens, and therefore for migrant communities to actually to penetrate any cultural activities is much harder than in urban areas. And if we have any practices, cultural practices and infrastructures in regional areas, they are mostly represented by, of course, by Western practices, as the Anglo-Celtic settlers were actually establishing them, and therefore it can be identified as this monocultural landscape. So this is the context to which actually non-Western migrant communities come to, and as we know that this process of migration, as you described, is quite traumatic, and but it's not the end of this trauma, let's say, because sometimes some migrants I spoke to, they were saying that it feels like we need to start walking again, and not having these spaces for creating their home through art practices or for cultural expressions is actually exacerbate the experience of regional resettlement. It's just a reminder for you how the regional landscape can look like, and I just wanted to say that it's a very drastic, probably, contrast between urban and highly populated places like Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne, and the vast distances and not so populated regional areas. And if you will see statistics of non-Western population in those areas, it's quite small. I would say it's minuscule. For example, yes, 3% of overall population in Toowoomba, for example, which means that it's all the non-Western communities being counted into this 3%. Why should we talk about music, and what's the role of arts in this in the process of resettlement? Well, I argue that everyday practices, everyday cultural practices, and music is one of them, is actually they reflect the cultural boundaries between various cultural identities. So they set up these boundaries and borderlines between various identities. But at the same time, there are the practices for which these boundaries and borders can be negotiated. Following the scene definition, music is actually a practice for which cultural citizenship can be negotiated and bargained. And yes, and his point of view was that citizenship, it's not a status, it's actually an act, and it's a practice. So music as a proxy for the arts is one of these practices. And I also argue that migrants' presence in art scenes, in regional arts, is actually the indicator of cultural inclusion or exclusion. And that's why we're talking about regional music scenes as a factor, is an indicator of cultural inclusion. It's a very short overlook, and I'm not going to talk about all these circles because it's quite a lot to talk about. I just wanted to show you in which places and spaces migrant music is present, and where can you find it in regional areas. And definitely there is a lot of example of how migrant music penetrates places of worship, for example. How migrant music is practiced at homes, and it's also another probably subject of conversation, why it's hidden, why it's not presented in a public space. So lots of home music practices. It's practices from various digital forms, and translocal communities actually recreate themselves through social media and through digital music platforms. But today I'm talking only about regional music scenes as an example, as I said, as an indicator of cultural inclusion or exclusion. So how can you see migrant music if you live in place like Cairns or Toowoomba or Coffs Harbour? Mostly migrant music is present in so-called welfare system, which can include resettlement services, which can include music at schools, at events that are organized by local councils. And probably the most vocal example of it is a celebration of Harmony Days. It's very widely popular in regional areas. It's one of the oldest probably cultural events in regional areas, and undoubtedly there are lots of pluses in doing this, in creating these festivals, because for multicultural communities, it creates a platform for presenting themselves to communicate with the wider community. It also provides an opportunity to converse and negotiate and familiarize other people with their cultural expression. The huge minus of the
Alex.
Yep, yeah. The huge minus of it is that it happens once a year. It's the only way to actually to present themselves, and for the rest of the year all these music practices are hidden, as I said. Yeah, I told about this. The other thing I want to mention very briefly is that migrant communities are trying to actively penetrate the regional music scenes through creating special repertoires, through translating the music into English language, through practicing popular genres, would it be, for example, reggae or Western pop, through adjusting their instruments and making electric sound, which are more probably would be popular amongst the wider communities. How it perceived? It's for the Australian colleagues, it's probably a very well known definition of cultural shows, which also is applicable to indigenous communities. So we're watching a cultural show rather than yes, we're watching a cultural show. Usually it's presented as very colorful, with performance with national costumes. Many people participate in the bands, 5-10 people. The thing is that it's perceived as a cultural show. It's usually understood as a prehistoric demonstration of something that's been lost by Western community. It's something that is pre-modern, and therefore there is no connection, there is no bridge with contemporary Western music. So it is again, it's cultural shows somehow demonstrate this exclusionary perception of contemporary migrant cultures. It's perceived as something amateur and natural. It's something that communities do in their everyday anyway, and therefore it's volunteer. It not necessarily will be paid for. It's recognized as a cultural expression rather than something that can be understood as a profession, and also as a equal to Western music practice. Why it's so difficult for migrant musicians actually to penetrate regional music scenes, and why it's perceived as something different and not normalized. The reasons that you can see it on your screen, all these reasons, that undoubtedly there is a huge cultural and educational barriers, that regional areas are just familiarizing themselves with diverse expressions, and therefore there is a need for cultural translators and intermediaries. Also, often, especially it's applicable for migrant youth, that they practice very unconventional genres, would it be hip hop or even indie, and in many regional areas there is no spaces, there are no events that these events could be these genres could be practiced. Undoubtedly, and this is what we were talking about in intersectionality, that migrants are marginalized because of their social status. They are, if they are refugees, their music therefore is somehow undermined. It's and not perceived as something as legitimate and worth of taking attention. So and there, so there is
1 minute.
okay, yeah. So there is a barriers of social exclusion on a social basis, and it's undoubtedly a huge financial barriers because then refugees arrive without a penny. It's really difficult for them to set up a professional musical career because they simply don't have financial resources to do that. Therefore, they choose to work in the existing sectors of economy. They become social workers, they become tradies, and music just remain in the realm of their homes or communities. Who loses from that? What kind of benefit we are losing from not taking seriously migrant cultural expressions and particularly music? Undoubtedly, there are at least 3 areas that could take on board migrant cultural capital and music as one of the form of this capital. Migration policies could take it on board as a way of actually negotiation cultural belonging for migrants, and therefore addressing the issues of migrants remaining in the regional areas rather than leaving it to and choosing urban areas instead of staying in the regions. Regional arts policies would definitely benefit from diversifying various scenes and enhancing various cultural expressions through the art policies. And the main point, of course, is that regional development policies could take it on board and understand regional development is not just economic productivities, but also in terms of cultural sustainability, in which migrant music as a form of cultural capital could actually provide as additional asset, let's say, and contribute to the regional cultural development. I think that's all I wanted to say. Thank you for your attention.